Okay, and our speaker tonight, Jesse's coming on. He was here earlier this year and was doing such a thorough job that he didn't quite get through all the birds. So he's going to pick up where he left off. And Jesse, if you could go ahead, since we're recording this, it helps if you do your own introduction and give us what makes you so special so we can record it and that's what we can then post for later on.
All right, sounds good. So let me just
Jesse.
Go ahead and I'll share my screen here and get my stuff started.
And share that computer audio too.
Audio is checked. That should be good. All right. So do excuse any weird technical interruptions. I'm usually sitting at home surrounded by 3 different computer monitors, and now I'm out at a hotel in West Texas looking at my screen on a little tiny pad of some sort. It's a Windows computer pad thing. But
more importantly, Jesse, how was the birding today?
Well, the birding was great. I got a golden eagle, which is one I'd been looking for out here in West Texas. Did not get the Clark's nutcracker, which had been showing up out here for the last week, but myself and several other birders chased that around for the last 2 days, and it apparently has moved on. But otherwise, there's crossbills, there's Cassin's finches, and an unexpected group of 5 young tundra swans flew into Balmorhea Lake, as I got to rush out there and see that. So the birding out here is wonderful. It's great to get out and do a little birding out in the wilderness. I've been just kind of camping in my car, but got a hotel here for a few nights to warm up because it is below freezing, well below freezing at night here. And I wanted to make sure I had stable internet for this. So for those of you who weren't here for the last time I gave this talk or who don't know who I am, my name is Jesse Huth. I'm a bird guide who lives in Central Texas. I've been birding for over 20 years now, and I travel all over the world looking at birds. Obviously not this year, but I do in other years where I travel around, lead birding tours, and especially around Texas, I lead a lot of birding tours. So I made this little presentation to help people who are just getting started in birding or who may have done a little bit of birding but need a refresher course on some of the common species around the hill country. You give you a little idea of where to start and where to go from there and how to identify birds by both sight and sound. Because I'd say about 80% of birding I do in the field is done with audio. If I hear a bird, I can try and identify it or see if it's something worth chasing down, if it's something I don't recognize. A lot of times you'll hear birds before you see them, and I've been doing that all afternoon here, and we'll be doing it all day tomorrow probably because I've been chasing sparrows. And way out, especially out here in West Texas, there's a lot of different types of wintering sparrows, and a lot of them don't like to show themselves very much. The white-crowned sparrows show off pretty well, but a lot of them stay deep down in the grass, so trying to identify them visually can be kind of difficult. But if you can hear what they're saying, you can identify which sparrow is where in what little tuft of grass. So when they fly out and you have a 2-second look at them, you can get a little better idea of what birds you're looking at because you heard them and you could say, hey, that sounds like a Cassin's sparrow, or that sounds like a grasshopper sparrow. So it helps to be able to know the sound as well as being able to see the birds. So I know a lot of you were probably here for my last talk, so I will skip through a lot of this beginning part fairly quickly, but I do want to do a quick review for anyone who was not here at the last time. Just a little bit of basic intro to bird watching. So basic birding, binoculars are useful, but they're not a requirement. If you don't have binoculars, you don't have the funds to go out and buy a pair of binoculars, you don't necessarily need them. Set up a little feeding station in your backyard or just go walk through a park and look and listen to the birds. Binoculars don't help you hear the birds any better, so if you want to learn their sounds, you don't necessarily need binoculars. They do help to get a closer look at the birds, but they are not a requirement. And if you do want to pick up a pair, you can get some fairly inexpensive ones for $150, $250. Vortex is a very good brand that I always recommend to people. It's inexpensive, good quality, and has an unlimited lifetime warranty. So if you drop them and break them, they'll send them in and you get a new pair from them free of charge. And no, I'm not sponsored by Vortex, though hint, hint, if any Vortex reps are listening, I could be. But next is field guides. You don't need to buy a field guide and carry it around with you all the time these days because they're available online. Having a paper field guide to carry with you can be helpful, especially out in places like West Texas, where I am now, where internet is very sparse and you get out to areas where you might not be able to look up an online field guide. But for your backyard birding, it's really helpful, especially for beginning birders who don't want to start dropping a lot of money on stuff necessarily. You can get free field guides online. You can Google search birding field guide, and there's a number of different resources that are all good quality sources from Audubon or Cornell that you can look up on there. And the one thing these do have an advantage over the paper field guides is they have audio recordings. You can't open up a book, press a button, and play a sound, but you can do that online. And there's also birding apps for your phone now, of course, that you can use as a field guide and have the audio to reference as well if you're trying to learn the songs. Now, there's a lot of birds here in Texas, so don't be intimidated. The most important thing to start birding is to go birding. You don't necessarily need to know what that bird is you're looking at in every circumstance, but just go out and start looking at birds. You'll start recognizing more and more of them as you go on. You'll start recognizing the sounds you hear a lot, and soon you'll start picking out the ones that you haven't heard or that sound unusual or look unusual, and you'll want to go check those out to learn what they are. So most of all, you can study all you want at home, but the best thing to do is, even if it's just out in your backyard, go birding. So a little bit of bird identification that I will probably be using some of these terms is just the different parts of a bird, especially when you're looking at all these little songbirds and little sparrows like you get this time of year, looking at the eye line, the color of the crown, which is the thing right on top of the head, the lores, which are the areas right in front of the eyes, mustache, it's that little stripe that comes off to the side. The breast is just the chest of the bird. Wing bars, if they have any bars on the wing, some do, some don't. It's a useful field mark to determine different types of species of birds. You look at if they have a crest or not, if they have an eye ring, which is a big ring around the eye, as the name suggests. The cheek can be different colors in different birds, and the tail, you want to look at the tail, see, especially if the bird is flying away, which I've been having a lot of experience today with all the sparrows. If you look at the tail, see if there's any white on the outer edges of the tail feathers. Is the tail rounded? Is it squared off, or does it have a little notch in it? If you can see that, those can be useful field marks to determining different types of birds. So check for all these field marks in every bird you see. You won't necessarily see all of them on the same bird, and you won't necessarily see all of the bird that you're looking at because they have this habit of moving around. So just get as many as you can and then try and narrow it down from there to determine what bird you're looking at. You also want to look at behavior and habitat, how it's moving, what kind of environment it's in, which again, since it's fresh in my mind, I go back to talking about my sparrows today. I've been looking for something out here called a Baird's sparrow. It winters down here. It's extraordinarily secretive, and its behavior is that when you're walking through a grassy field, it will not flush out of the grass until you're almost right on top of it. Then it'll explode out from underneath your feet, fly 20, 30 feet away from you, skimming right across the top of the grass, and then immediately drop down into the grass and start running along the ground to get away from wherever you saw it drop in. So that's a behavior you can look at for if you're looking for this specific sparrow. When I'm flushing sparrows out there, if I see one fly up into the tree, of course I still look at it just in case, but I can be pretty certain that that's not the Baird's sparrow I'm looking at, because it will almost never fly up and perch in a tree for an extended period of time. For that, you'd want to look at something like a grasshopper sparrow, or Vesper sparrows do that a lot. So this behavior can be helpful when you can't get these field marks, like this little Baird's sparrow. I have seen a couple today that I think might have been Baird's sparrows, but all I was able to see was that behavior. That behavior is very telling, but again, there's still other things I want to see on the bird to be 100% sure that I've seen that. So I'm going to go back to where I saw those birds next morning and see if I can relocate them and maybe get a couple different field marks on this specific little sparrow. And finally, you want to determine if it's making any sounds. Like I said, listening for the birds is very important. It can help you determine what you are looking at. And in some cases, it is the only way to tell what you are looking at. There's the alder and the willow flycatcher is one I always bring up because they used to be a single species called the trails flycatcher. Then they got split into alder and willow flycatcher, and you cannot reliably tell them apart by sight, even if you're holding the bird in your hand, unless you have a major outlier and you can measure all the different parts of the bird. They are identical, but they sound different. So if you can hear them, you can identify them. If you can't hear them, for those two, I just call them trails type flycatcher because you can't reliably tell the two apart by just looking at them. So going on a little bit, again, I always want to go over the basic birding rules that everyone should follow. For one, be considerate of the birds. Keep your distance. If you're spooking the bird too much, it keeps flying away from you. You can get a look at the bird as best you can. If it's sitting there and it's acting a little agitated, maybe back off a little bit and try not to disturb the bird. If you're running around through grass chasing sparrows up like I've been doing, one, that is not something you want to do in a place that's highly trafficked because for one, you'll scare all the sparrows off. But if you go out in the middle of nowhere like I've been doing and you chase the sparrows up, flush them out of the grass a couple times. If you don't get a look at the sparrow, just leave that sparrow alone and go on to the next little area instead of harassing the same bird over and over and over all afternoon. Again, don't disturb nest areas or habitat where birds are nesting. Not really a concern this time of year, but during spring and summer, if you see birds building nests, try not to get too close and drive them away from their nests. Call playback is always a big argument among birders. If you're in the middle of nowhere by yourself in an area where very few people go, and you play a couple songs to see a bird that you think is in the brush, it pops up, you look at it, I don't think you've done any harm to the bird. If you're in an area where there's lots and lots and lots of birders going there for one specific bird, I'd say avoid using playback, because if everyone starts doing it, you might not have distracted the bird for more than 5-10 minutes, but if everyone's doing that, it's taking a lot of time out of that bird's day if it's coming around trying to see what that other bird is that's calling. And if it's a highly trafficked area, you might be using the playback and attract some birders, which is a awkward conversation to have if they think that they actually just heard the bird. So that comes into the next one, be considerate of birders, share information, help people out with identification. If you see a bird and you see someone struggling to identify it, and you know what it is, provide a little bit of information. That is considered a good habit to have amongst birders, helping people out to learn. Don't be condescending, of course, but if you know the bird and you can say, hey, have you thought that looks like blah, blah, blah bird? That is very useful to people. And if someone's looking for a certain bird and you know where the bird is, you might give them a little bit of that information. Again, as long as it's not a sensitive species or a sensitive area. For instance, if you find a rare bird that's nesting, I wouldn't publish those coordinates or that area that bird is nesting online, because there might be too many people that go there. Not everyone follows the birding ethics, and some people will get too close and disturb the bird if it's a publicly accessible information. So just be considerate of the birds while also providing useful information to the birders. For instance, today I was chasing around a Clark's nutcracker, which was supposed to be out here in Alpine. It hadn't been seen for the last couple of days, and there were about 5 other birders out there. So we all met up, exchanged cell phone information, made a little group chat, and we were keeping coordinated while we were scouring the town for where this bird might be. It never showed up, sadly, but we were never able to track down where it went. But it's still useful to share information amongst birders. And finally, be considerate of non-birders. Private property is private property. Don't go on it. This is Texas. No bird is worth chasing and getting shot at by some guy who doesn't want you on his land. Like I said before, be considerate of sightings reports. If you find a rare bird and it's on someone's private property, ask them before publishing that anywhere. You might want to put it on an eBird checklist or something like that, but ask the people if they're okay with you telling people that this bird is on their property. If it's a really rare bird, there might be people that start driving in as soon as that sightings report goes up, and they might have people driving around the edge of their property with binoculars staring onto their land. So if it's a rare bird, if you do want to put it on eBird and the property owner doesn't want the information published, you can hide that checklist on eBird. And finally, just be aware of where you're pointing those binoculars. You might be looking at a bird, but it might be in line with someone's window in their house, and they might not appreciate what looks like you staring in their window with binoculars. So we'll skip through the feeders and waterers so we can get on and have a little more time to talk about birds. Here we go, birds. So this is where I left off last time, I believe. I know I talked about the golden cheek warbler as the last bird, but I skipped through a lot to get to the golden cheek warbler, and I think I ended on the European starling. So we'll just start here and move on to all the next ones. So European starling is very common in urban environments. You see these in cities a lot. You'll also see them around cattle feedlots and areas where there's lots of grain on the ground. Usually large flocks. Starlings look like little short-tailed grackles when you see them flying by. In the picture here, you can see they've got all these beautiful spots on them. If you look at them in binoculars or see them up close, you can see those spots. But when they're in the distance, they just look all black. And if they're not in breeding plumage or if they're juveniles, they don't have as many spots or as much coloration on them, and they will just be all black. But that really short, stubby tail is a big giveaway. Big, chunky, bulky body, little stubby tail, big, hefty-looking all-purpose bill. Male and female look very similar, and they're usually found, again, in very large flocks. And here we will finally test out, see if the sound works. And they sound like very mechanical, clicking, chirping, all kinds of warbly, weird sounds. I always think these birds sound like the old dial-up internet tones. They're just clicking and squeaking away randomly and weird, and there's lots of variation in them, but it's usually just clicking, warbly, mechanical sounding squeaks whenever you hear the starlings making noise. So the next one is a little bit nicer bird to look at than the starling. It's one that a lot of people like seeing around here in Texas. Not really this time of year. If you go way down to South Texas, there's still some around in South Texas, but in Central Texas and North Texas, they've usually moved south for the winter time, but they'll be moving back upwards in the summertime. But this is scissor-tailed flycatcher. You see them in both urban and rural environments. They're usually perched on either power lines or bare branches. You don't see them sitting in treetops all that often because these other perches are available to them. And they have this very long, unwieldy tail. So if they're sitting in a regular tree with a lot of little branches, they risk getting that tail tangled up or caught in the tree. So they rather perch on big open, either bare dead branches, or most often I see them perched on power lines. So anytime you're driving around out in the countryside or in more urban areas, you can look up on the power lines, and if you see something that kind of looks shaped like a mockingbird but with a much longer tail, it's likely a scissor-tailed flycatcher. That is the easiest field mark to look at on this bird. Is a very long, dark tail, mostly light-colored gray head, dark wings, and salmon-colored under the wings, which is somewhat conspicuous when they fly. Now, the only difference between males and females is the female has a slightly shorter tail. So if you see a bunch of birds on a power line and you see some of the scissor tails have really long tails, some are a little bit shorter, the shorter tailed ones are the females, the longer tailed ones are the males. And usually you'll see these as individuals or in pairs, except for when they migrate and they gather together in large flocks where you'll see 50 to sometimes several hundred birds moving together in great big flocks. And that's usually in the fall. You'll see them gathering together before they head south for the wintertime. But let's listen to this bird. It's a very nasal, high-pitched squeak followed by a little bit of a trill. And you'll usually hear them talking, making noise when they fly, but sometimes if it's evening and they're coming into roost, you'll get them talking together, sitting on their perch. But a lot of times when they fly, you'll hear them do that little chick, chick, chirr, a couple little nasal chip notes followed by a little bit of a trill. Now, the one other thing to watch out for is if you do see something that looks like a scissor-tailed flycatcher, long, dark, forked tail, but you see a big black cap on the top of the head, that is something to get excited about because that is a fork-tailed flycatcher. They're a Central and South American bird, but occasionally they do show up in Texas, and there have been several reports of them in the last couple of years being up here in Texas. So always check out the scissor-tails for one, because they're a gorgeous, beautiful bird. But two, if you take a closer look at them and you see one with a much darker head, that could be a fork-tailed flycatcher, which is something to definitely get excited about because it's a nice, rare bird. Now, speaking of little gray birds that like to sit up on top of things, this is the northern mockingbird. These are seen basically everywhere. They are in urban environments, they are way out in the countryside, they're in grasslands, they're in forests. Practically anywhere you go here in Texas, you can find a mockingbird. And they are even somewhat nocturnal. If you hear something chirping and making a bunch of noise at night, it's a decent chance that you might have a mockingbird there because they are vocal at most times of day. Usually they're most active during the day, but at night they will still make noise. So the most obvious thing about this bird is gray overall on the body, a little lighter colored underneath, gray tail, dark wings. But the most obvious thing is when they fly, you see these big white patches on the wing. You can see it a little bit when they're perched, like you can see in this picture here. It has a little bit of white showing on the wing, but it is very, very bright when they fly. It's very big white patches when they're flying around. So especially if you're driving around and you see a bird fly across the road, flashing these big white wing patches, but otherwise being just a little gray bird with a little long tail. And it's not as long as a scissor tail, but it's still a decently long tail. That's probably going to be a mockingbird. Now, this picture I put in here is kind of a demonstration that the field marks are not always going to be there because mockingbirds usually have a beak about twice the length of this bird in this photo. But I found this bird and it looked weird and I wasn't sure it was a mockingbird at first when I saw the silhouette, and then I got closer, got some pictures of it, and apparently, excuse me, it somehow broke its beak. So I don't know if it had a window strike or what happened to this bird, but its beak was snapped off on the tip. Still seemed to be healthy, was able to find food. I was watching it foraging on the ground and eating berries, so it seemed like it wasn't harmed too much by this. But just that silhouette of this bird did not look like a mockingbird at first. But you look closer and sure enough, it was just missing the field mark of the beak being the correct length. So whenever you see something weird, it could be a different species, but it also could be just something going weird with a more common species. So take a closer look at that. You might have a bird with a broken beak like this. You might have something that is leucistic, which is not quite albino, but it has white where there shouldn't be white, or it could be melanistic, which is the opposite of that, where it has darkness, dark feather coloration where it should be lighter feather coloration. These are just different aberrations that any species of bird can get. They can get damage. One that I see fairly frequently is a bird with a short or missing tail. I was just down in South Texas a few weeks ago and saw a green jay that had a tail about the length of a starling. Very, very short, stubby tail. Not at all like you expect to see with a green jay, but it probably had a close run-in with a Cooper's hawk or something like that grabbed its tail and plucked the tail feathers out, and it was just growing back new tail feathers. So look at the field marks, study the field marks, study the silhouette and the shape of the bird, but also be prepared for things that don't perfectly match up, because this is nature and things don't always fit in the exact perfect little box. Some stuff tries to eat other stuff, or birds get damaged, or there's just a genetic variation that happens in that one bird that can bring up these differences that you don't necessarily see very often. But now let's listen to this bird. I'm sure most of you know mockingbirds mimic other birds, so this is only going to be a short sample of some of that. But do note that they usually do everything in threes. They'll do 3 of one call, then 3 of another. Like there, that one's doing a curve-billed thrasher. Did it 3 times. This is just a general mockingbird chip. They do that everywhere. That's not something they're mimicking. And this is their scold call if they're angry. All mockingbirds do this. So they can do that chip, chip, or the scolding buzz, buzz, buzz. But everything else, when they're doing their display and they're trying to mimic other things, usually they do that in 3s or 4s. So you'll hear it doing a killdeer 3 times, and it doing a white-eyed vireo 3 times, then it doing a Chuckwill's widow 3 times. And if you listen to enough mockingbirds, you'll notice that they don't always get the pitch perfectly right. It'll sound a little bit off, or they'll get the speed a little bit wrong. Like killdeer, I've noticed mockingbirds do it just a little bit too fast pretty often. They don't do kitty, kitty. The mockingbirds are a little kitty, kitty, kitty. Just a little bit faster, but something that'll tell you that's a little bit wrong. Some of them will get it really, really good, and they'll mimic it almost perfectly, depending on the bird they're mimicking. But usually if you're hearing a whole bunch of different birds singing from one little bush, and they're all only singing 3 times, you can be pretty sure that you're listening to a mockingbird. So let's go on to the next one. I will take a second here. Since I can't really see the screen and the text chat, if anyone is asking any questions at any time, feel free to interrupt me and let me answer the question before I move on to the next slide. So if anyone has any questions now, if anyone else can see those questions on the screen and let me know, I will answer them. Otherwise, I will move on. But just let me know if there's
I'll
questions.
watch for them. If they pop up, I'll let you know.
Great, thanks. I'm used to having 3 monitors where I can watch all of this at one time, but only having 1 is a little bit limiting for this. All right, let's go on to the next one. Now this is a barn swallow. This is a common bird that you get around buildings, ponds, open areas. They're very fast moving. They dart through the air. They catch flying insects. And they're a very, very pretty little bird. You see them just flying through the air. A lot of times if there's a pond, they get water on the wing. You'll see them diving down and skimming across the surface of the pond to pick up a little bit of water or to grab an insect off the surface. They're very agile flyers. We have a number of different swallows in the United States, a lot of different swallows here in Texas, but the barn swallow is the only one with that great big long forked tail. Those 2 outer tail feathers are very long, elongated and forked in the barn swallow. And you see that pretty well when they're flying. If they're a distance and you don't have binoculars, it's not always obvious. But if you put some binoculars on them, you can almost always see those big long forked tails, which will tell you that it's a barn swallow. Otherwise, they have that nice orangey color underneath, a little bit darker on the throat and on the forehead, and the back is all this glossy purplish black. So really, really beautiful bird, and a little bit different from a lot of the other swallows that we have, which will have either a band of orange and the rest being white underneath, or being pure white, or having a collar around their neck. But none of the other swallows that we expect to see here in Texas will have those long forked tails. Now, this bird commonly nests on front porches. I get calls every year. Why is this bird building a nest right over my front door? That's almost always a barn swallow. And they have evolved to do that because they've found that that is a safe location to build a nest. They won't have predators raiding their nest if they build it over someone's front porch. So it's not always the most convenient thing for the homeowner to have a barn swallow move in there. They do kind of make a little bit of a mess of the front porch, but they do eat a lot of flying insects, and they are very fun to watch. So if you do have barn swallows build a nest on your front porch, I do encourage you to consider leaving the nest there and letting them all grow up throughout the year. For one, it's really fun to watch them as they grow in the nest and as the adults fly in and out to grab insects. And they make a really interesting sound, which I'll play here in just a second. And they do eat a lot of annoying insects that will be around your yard. If you want to have them around, but you don't necessarily want them directly over your door, putting a little bit of a board, just like a 2x4 or a piece of plywood that's a few inches wide, nailed up off to the side that gives them a platform to build on, is one way to kind of let them show up, but also give them a little bit of instruction on where they should build their nest. And they'll usually take that little platform, as it's easier to build their little mud nest on a platform versus just sticking it straight to the wall. But very fun little birds, very vocal. Usually you'll see them about 2 to 6 birds flying around, but occasionally they'll get much larger flocks. But let's listen to what this bird sounds like. So a little squeaky sound, kind of, to me, it almost sounds like a check mark. Down, up, drit, 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 drit. And then they do that little rattle when they're flying around. But they're most vocal when they're either visiting their nest or when they're flying around. Once they're roosting for the night, or if they're sitting lined up on a perch, they don't make as much noise. But when they're flying around, they're almost always vocalizing. So if you listen for that drip, 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 drip sound, you can easily find a barn swallow. Now this next one is another common flying bird that you will see in urban areas and open environments, but it is not a swallow, it is a swift. And this one is, while it flies similarly to the barn swallow, it is very, very different. For one, it's not a swallow. The shape of the bird is much, much different, and its behavior is much different. So chimney swifts are called chimney swifts because they historically have nested in people's chimneys. Before that, they nested in either vertical gaps in rocks or in hollowed out trees that have died, and the center of the tree is hollow but still standing up. Then they adapted to nest in chimneys, and now that habitat is being reduced because people don't want birds nesting in their chimneys. So we're putting up chimney swift towers wherever we can all around the country. By we, I mean birders in general. We're encouraging people to put up chimney swift towers because these birds eat mosquitoes. They're great to have around. They're beneficial birds, but they are very picky about where they will build their nests. And the reason for that is a very specific physiological requirement. These birds cannot perch on regular horizontal surfaces. They have to perch vertically. Their feet are in such a way on their body that when they land, they have to land straight up and down. If you look closely at this picture, I don't know if you'll be able to see it on your end, but in the tail feathers, they have 3 little prongs sticking out of the tail. They use that to stick into whatever they're perching on to hold them vertically, and then their feet just grab onto the surface. So if you ever do see a chimney swift sitting on the ground, it probably crash landed for some reason and is unable to take off because they can't really run along the ground. They can't move around all that easily on the ground. So if you do see a chimney swift that's looks mostly healthy but is otherwise stuck on the ground, if you can encourage it up onto a wall, it'll usually take off and fly away just because that's how they're used to being just how they're used to landing. They need a vertical surface. And that is why they build their nests in chimneys, because they can't land on a branch and build a nest. They have to land on a vertical surface. But when they're flying, you'll notice that their wing beats are much stiffer. They have very long pointed wings, and instead of flapping where the wings go forward and back like you see on the swallows, the chimney swifts have very short, shallow wing beats, and they flutter and fly around. And as their name suggests, they are indeed very swift. They move extremely quickly, usually in small flocks, 2 to 5 birds. You'll see them zipping all around the place, just catching everything that's flying through the air. And they look kind of like a cigar on wings. Unlike the barn swallow that had that nice forked tail, these guys have a very squared and chopped off tail and a very rounded forehead and front. Beak comes to a little point. So they look like very long winged birds, but the body shape is that of a little squatty cigar. But let's listen to what they sound like. Very fast chattering. So that is what the sound they'll be making almost all the time as they fly around. If you're outside and you hear chip, 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 chatter, 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 just zipping overhead super fast, look up and see if you can spot them, because there's probably a couple chimney swifts circling around overhead, catching a whole bunch of flying insects. So usually this is when I have the group all try and identify birds, but since we're not in person or standing in a group, it's not as fun, so I will just play the videos for you. The first one here, hopefully the sound is coming through. You can hear chip, 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 chatter, 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 and they're flying very, very quickly. These are the chimney swifts. So you can see they move extremely quickly. They don't flap their wings very much. They soar, and then they just give little short fluttery wing beats as they zip around. And then the next one is, of course, our scissor-tailed flycatcher. It's got that really long tail, nice white head, dark brownish wings. But yeah, you can see that really long, nice tail, and a little bit of salmon color under the wing. Okay, so if there's no questions, we'll move on to the next group of birds.
No questions yet.
No questions. All right. So this next one is a very common sight in urban areas and visiting a lot of people's feeders. This is indeed the blue jay. You get them in parks a lot. They like being in urban areas, in certain types of wooded areas. If you get nice big oak forests, you get lots of blue jays. And they do come to feeders fairly regularly if you're in the right habitat. So the blue jays themselves, they're a little bit bigger than mockingbirds. They're pretty big, chunky birds. Their upper parts, the back, the wings, the tail is blue. The wings have these really gorgeous black, blue, and white barring on them, a little bit deeper blue than the rest of the bird. But the upper parts of the bird, the back, the neck, the head, is kind of this pale sky blue. And then the face, as you can see, has a dark eye line, dark lores, and a little dark collar going around the neck. And while this bird isn't holding it up, you can still see that they have a crest. That varies depending on how the bird feels at that moment. The crest is either held back against the head, like you can see in this picture, or sometimes it will be flared up and much more obvious. And you'll see that big triangular crest on the top of the bird. So if you see a big blue bird in central Texas and it has a nice big crest, you're probably looking at a blue jay. The closest other jay that you would find with a crest would be the Steller's jay. They do show up occasionally out here in West Texas, but they're usually higher altitude birds. You get them up in the mountains, and their head and crest is entirely black. So if you see a bird like in this picture that has blue on the crest and a nice big crest, you're looking at a blue jay. So overall, it's a pretty obvious bird when you see it. If you only see the tail even, that's a diagnostic look. If you see that long blue tail with blue and black bars going across it with a few little white spots in it, that again is going to be a blue jay. So pretty easy bird to identify. And they're also a good mimic of certain species. They don't have quite the range that a mockingbird has, but they are extremely good at mimicking red-shouldered hawks. And a number of jays will do this. The blue jays and the green jays, I've heard both do it very well. They'll do it either to just annoy other birds, or if there's a bunch of other birds at the feeders, you'll sometimes see couple blue jays fly in and start doing this hawk call, and all the other birds take off, and the blue jays come in and gorge themselves on all the peanuts. But so if you're ever out walking around and you hear a red-shouldered hawk, and then you see a blue jay where you think that red-shouldered hawk was coming from, it's a good chance that it was the blue jay that made that sound. And they do have quite a few different sounds. So let's listen to what they sound like. Of course, the regular jay. They do this ringing bell sound. There's a red shoulder. That last little bit was the kind of part of the red-shouldered hawk call that they'll do, but they can get really loud with that. And blue jays are social birds. You will sometimes see them individually, but more often than not, you'll have a little family group of 2 to 6 birds that'll be moving through the forest together, and they do make a lot of noise when they're moving around. So the next one is the other large blue bird that we get in the hill country, which is the Woodhouse's scrub jay. Now, if you have an older field guide, this will be labeled as a Western scrub jay, but a couple years ago, they split that into the Woodhouse's scrub jay and the California scrub jay. So it is no longer the Western scrub jay. Well, the ones we have here in Texas and Arizona and all the areas around here are going to be Woodhouse's scrub jays. So this is another common feeder bird. If you're in the right habitat, you'll get them in some of our more rural parks and wooded areas. But unlike the blue jay, they, of course, as the name suggests, like the scrubbier habitat. So instead of nice big oak forests like you find with the blue jays, you'll find these guys out in the ash juniper and in the scrublands and in those smaller, denser trees. You won't find them in perfectly manicured parks. You'll find them in more wilderness areas that have a little bit more scrubby wild land, lots of mesquite, lots of juniper. Of course, some oaks around, and there is overlap in the habitat between Woodhouse's scrub jay and the. But generally, when I'm out birding, I'll see either one or the other. It's uncommon when I find a place that has both of them together, but it definitely does happen. And both of them can move around to be in different places at different time of the year. Now, the most obvious difference for this guy between him and the blue jay is the scrub jay does not have a crest, and the blue is a little bit deeper blue. While the blue jay had that nice sky blue color on the back of the head, this guy is a little bit deeper color. It's a more intense, vivid blue. They have gray on the belly, a little bit of bluish gray mantle, that part right on the back, and a little white underneath on the throat. And they do have a little bit of a white eyebrow as well. So very, very deep blue. There aren't really many other birds in central Texas that look like the Woodhouse's scrub jay. So if you see a large blue jay with no crest, but a very deep, vivid blue color, you're probably looking at the Woodhouse's scrub jay. If you're coming out here to West Texas, you go into Big Bend areas and you see a bird that looks similar to this, but a little bit lighter colored blue, not quite as intense on the facial markings, and a little bit more just solid gray underneath without that little blue collar. That would be a Mexican jay. But again, you don't see those all the way over in the hill country. In the hill country, you're mostly just going to see either the blue jays or the Woodhouse's scrub jays. And again, they behave similarly to the blue jays. You get them either individually or in small family groups that are noisily moving through the forest. So let's listen to what these guys sound like. So a little harsher. So they do these little clicking calls, and overall their J sound isn't as much of a J as it is a rasp. So I think the blue jay is the more refined city jay. It says J, J, while the scrub jay is your scrubby little wildlands bird that has a raspier voice, and it's more rit, 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 and which matches with the habitat. You find the scrub jays out in the scrub, and their voice, at least to me, sounds a little bit more scrubby. So let's go on to the next one. The killdeer. One of the nice birds that identifies itself for you because its voice sounds like killdeer, which is where it got its name. So the killdeer is a plover. It's a type of shorebird that does not always go on the shore. In fact, I see them usually in places other than on a shoreline versus being on a shore, though they can be there as well. You find them on beaches. They like being in open grassy fields. They like being in big rocky fields, in parking lots. You'll see them out in tilled fields or farmland. Basically, any big flat open area can have a killdeer. And that includes the roofs of very large stores, because places like Walmart build these big giant stores and they coat the roof in gravel as a type of insulation. And then the killdeer looks at this and says, that looks like a perfect place to build a nest. So they land on the gravel, they build a little nest, and they hatch out a bunch of chicks on the roof of Walmart. So if you're ever going to the store to go shopping and you hear killdeer flying around, there's a good chance that they are up on the roof of the store. So it's about the size of a pigeon. It's a pretty decent sized plover, and it's the only plover that we have here in Texas that has two dark rings around the neck. You can see it has one big bold dark ring and then one a little bit lower. All our other plovers or at least all our other plovers that have rings will only have a single ring around the neck. We do have other plovers that don't have rings, but I won't get into those right now. They're a lot obvious, more different than the killdeer. But if you see a plover with two rings around its neck, that's going to be a killdeer. Now, an interesting behavior that they have, as you can see in this second picture, they've got a bright, rusty, reddish rump. And if you get close to their nest site, or if they have chicks, you will see them drop a wing down, kind of flop it around, and expose this reddish patch on its rump. It's pretending to have a broken wing and to be injured. So it looks like a tasty, easy meal for any predator that's coming along. And so the killdeer will move away from its nest site, leading the predator away. And then as soon as it gets a safe distance away from the nest site, it will miraculously heal itself and fly away laughing at the predator. So that's just a way that they defend their nests, because their nests are little impressions that they scrape out in gravel. They don't build a bunch of sticks together. They don't make a nice soft nest liner. It's just rocks in the shape of a bowl that they lay their eggs in. So not the most intricate nest, but their eggs look like little rocks. They're very well camouflaged, so it works for the killdeer. And usually you see them either individually or nesting in pairs. This time of year, you'll see larger groups of them. In the wintertime, they kind of congregate and gather together in big open fields, and you can see anywhere from 2 to several dozen of them filling up a big field, just hanging out for the wintertime. So let's listen to where it got its name from. There's the killdeer. Killdeer, killdeer, killdeer. So it takes a little bit of creative listening sometimes, because they have a few different calls, but you can put together deer, deer, killdeer, 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 and that's where it got its name from. And so when you hear a bird saying killdeer, you can know, hey, that's a killdeer. So let's go on to the next one. The eastern bluebird. We've talked about the blue jays, so now let's look at the other blue birds that we have around here in Central Texas. The eastern bluebird is a favorite of a lot of people, and you can see why. It's an absolutely stunning bird. All down the back of the head, the crown, the wings, the tail is this striking, deep, bright blue, at least in the male. The female is not quite as vivid blue, though it's still kind of grayish and blue tinged, and the wings are still going to have a nice blue color. And then the chest has that rusty orange down through the throat, down to the belly, and then the lower belly is going to be white. But overall, gorgeous, gorgeous bird. Much smaller than the blue jays. The body size is a little bit smaller than a mockingbird, about similar in size to a cardinal. But of course, they don't have a crest and they're not bright red, so you can tell them apart from the cardinal pretty easy. But the male, which is shown in this picture here, is very, very easy to distinguish. And the female has similar color patterns, but just isn't quite as brightly colored. Usually you'll see them in pairs, perched up on a power line or perched on top of a bluebird box. Let's listen to what the eastern bluebird sounds like. So just a nice little warbly do, do, do. And they can vary that up a little bit, but the part that I always listen for at first is that first chick chick, and then it follows do, do, do. They always do that chick chick beforehand, and you'll hear them doing just that part of their song when they're flying. I'll play it one more time. Here, that chick chick. You'll hear them doing that all over the place when they're flying around. Chick chick, chick chick, chick chick. You can be pretty sure that you're hearing a bluebird if you hear that. And then, of course, if they do the rest of their song, it's a nice, gorgeous, warbly, rising and falling song of the eastern bluebird. All right, so again, I don't have the identification challenge here because, well, everyone's not in the room with me. But we'll look at a video of this guy. Notice the blue above, white eyebrow, no crest, grayish mantle and white below. That is, of course, the Woodhouse's scrub jay, doing what he loves to do, which is picking up a whole bunch of nuts or peanuts or seeds and carrying them away to put them in a little cache that he hides somewhere. He'll bury them or hide them in a tree or a little hole somewhere and save them for when he needs them. And you'll see them doing this if you put out seed for them. They'll pick up sunflower seeds, but what they really like is either peanuts, large sunflower seeds, or suet that you can either buy or make for them. And they'll absolutely love that stuff. Let's listen to this song here. This one I don't have a video, but you can try and identify this one there at home, which is the eastern bluebird. I don't know why my slides all just zoomed in, but hey, there's a bluebird. Okay. Yeah, there's eastern bluebird coming in for a landing. Okay, good. All right, so next bird here is a woodpecker. This is our golden-fronted woodpecker. It's one of the most common woodpeckers that we get here in Central Texas. You see them in wooded areas. They like dead wood and oaks. You'll see them even in live trees. You'll see them crawling up and down the bark, pecking away looking for insects, but they really like having dead trees that have lots of wood-boring insects in them. So you'll see them drilling into those trees to get these insects out. They also really like suet. So if you either buy suet or make your own suet out of peanut butter and lard and cornmeal and smear it on a tree trunk, you'll get these woodpeckers coming in and gorging themselves on your suet, and they absolutely love it. So these two birds here are a male and female. The male on the right has that nice barring down the back. It's all kind of tan underneath on the belly. If you get a good view of the belly, you can see a little bit of yellow right in the center, but that's usually difficult to see because their belly is pressed up against the trunk of a tree. But on the head, you can see down the back is this nice golden color. On the top of the head is a little red patch right on the crown. And then the lores right in front are golden as well. The female looks just the same as the male, except it's lacking the red on the crown. Everything else is basically the same. And you'll usually see these individually or in pairs. They don't form big flocks. You'll never see them flying around in a big group unless something really weird is happening. But you'll see one or two of them moving around together, usually a male and female. Let's listen to them. So repeated chuck, 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 chuck. And then in the background, you can hear another one calling. There you go. They do that trill. Trr, trr, trr. Now, it wasn't included in this recording was the drumming, and that's the trr, drilling sound that they have. If you hear that really rapid fire drumming, that is a signal that they usually sit up on either a very loud hollow log or the metal on the side of your house, and they do that drumming. If you just hear them tap, 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 that isn't a signal. That's just them trying to burrow into the wood to get at whatever little insect is down inside there. Now let's look at the next one, which is our other common woodpecker that we have around central Texas, the ladder-backed woodpecker. It's seen in very similar habitats to the golden-fronted woodpeckers. They like dead wood, oaks, and they also love coming into suet. They're a little bit smaller than the golden-fronteds. They still have that barring down the back, but as you can see, the golden-fronted, it's a little bit finer barring, while the ladder-backed, the bars are a little bit bolder. That's where they get their name, ladder-back woodpecker. It's that nice variation of white and black straight down the back. The belly on these birds isn't plain tanned like the golden-fronted. It has little speckles down the front as well, and the tail is all black. But the biggest difference is when you look at the head. The golden-fronted, it was not very marked on the face, didn't have a big stripe on the side of the head like you can see on these guys. We can go back to the golden-fronted. See, the face is fairly plain and unmarked. But on the ladderback, it's got that little black mustache stripe. It's got a big black eye line. And the difference, these two birds are male and female. The bird on the left here is the male. It has that bright red crown. The female just has a black crown instead of being bright red. So usually, again, individually or in pairs. But let's listen to what this bird sounds like. They whinny. And you'll hear them just do little pick, pick calls when they're doing little contact calls with each other. But usually when they're disturbed or when they're just trying to attract attention, they do that long drawn out whinny call. And you'll hear that very frequently. And finally, we have the last woodpecker that we get a lot of here in central Texas, the downy woodpecker. This is our smallest woodpecker. It's even smaller than the ladder-backed woodpecker. And the markings on it are fairly distinct. You can look at the back on this bird. Unlike the last two woodpeckers we looked at, this one, the back is all black on either sides, but right in the middle of the back, it has a big pure white patch. There's no barring on the back of this bird at all. There's a few little speckles on the wing. The belly and breast is all white. It still has that dark mustache stripe. But when you look at the eye of this bird, it doesn't just have a little line. The line goes straight back and connects up to the rear crown of the bird. And the forecrown of the bird is red. And the beak on this guy is noticeably small. And this bird is even a little smaller than a cardinal. So it's a very small woodpecker. But they behave much like the other two woodpeckers. They like wooded areas with dead wood. A lot of times you'll see them just pecking away on little dead branches on oak trees. Similar in shape to ladderback woodpecker, but again, smaller and more delicate beak. There's a very similar woodpecker to this that is much larger called the hairy woodpecker. It's not very common in central Texas, but it does occur every now and then. The biggest difference is one, size, and two, the beak on the hairy woodpecker looks much, much heavier. It's longer, it's thicker, and just proportionally it looks a lot bigger. But let's listen to the downy woodpecker. It whinnies, but higher pitched. And it does little pick calls like the ladderback, but higher pitched. And there's its drumming, a little tapping on the trees. So the pattern of the sound of this bird and the ladderback woodpecker are very similar. They both whinny, they both do little single note pick calls, but the downy woodpecker is just noticeably higher pitched. It's a smaller woodpecker, so it's got a higher pitched voice. Ladderback woodpecker is a little bit deeper voice, and then of course the golden-fronted woodpecker is deeper still. So yeah,
well, somebody's asked a question here saying that they've never seen a golden-fronted woodpecker here in Williamson County, only the red-bellied. woodpecker. So
Yes.
yeah.
Good. Thank you for bringing that up. I completely forgot to put that in because I made this set of slides originally for the Wimberley Birding Society, and we really only have golden fronteds down here. But yeah, if you go a little bit in the northeastern direction, or just straight north from where I am, you do get the red-bellied woodpecker, which, let me go back to golden fronted. Size-wise, red-bellied woodpecker is very similar in size to golden fronted. It might be like a half-inch smaller, little bit more delicate, but in general, it's going to be the same size as the golden fronted woodpecker. And the main difference in field marks is the golden fronted woodpecker has that gold down the back of the head, red on the top in the male, and gold on the front, while the red-bellied woodpecker is just a straight, solid band of red that goes all the way across the top of the head and down the nape. The female just doesn't have as much red. It doesn't go as far forward on the head, but they still have that nice line of red that goes straight down the back and down the nape. And the sound, sounds, let me play golden fronted here, is chuck, 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 chuck. That's the golden fronted. I don't have red-bellied, but usually it's trill, which is this, is going to be a little bit higher pitched and a little bit more nasal. So if you go to the All About Birds website, it has both of these birds on there, and you can listen to that song and that call. I'll have to update my slides for the next talk here. But yes, that is a very good point, and thank you for bringing that up, because in different ranges across Texas, down where I am, I almost never see red-bellied woodpeckers. But if I drive 50 miles, you'll get to an area where you almost never see golden fronted woodpeckers. And there's certain areas, basically right along I-35 is kind of a dividing area for these two birds. If I go birding in San Marcos, I can go to a park on one side of San Marcos and see golden fronteds, and go to a park on the other side and see mostly red bellies. So they keep fairly separate along their little range for whatever reason, but there is a little bit of overlap. But yes, good point, and thank you for bringing that up. All right, so unless there's any more questions on the woodpeckers, I'll move on to another very common bird around central Texas and around the United States in general, which is the red-tailed hawk. You see these soaring in many open areas. You see them a lot along roadsides. You see them perched on telephone poles, which I have seen probably 100 red-tailed hawks as I've been driving around out here in West Texas. And you see them either soaring up high or perched on a nice big perch where they can see a big open field. You don't usually see them in the woods. They're not a little accipiter that's made for darting between branches. These are a buteo. They're a big, soaring, heavy hawk that's looking for something like a rabbit or sometimes a very large ground bird that they'll go after. When they're flying, you see these big rounded wings. They're not pointed, not delicate. These birds look like a B-52 bomber. They're great big, soaring around, great at maintaining altitude. And in almost all types of red-tailed hawks, you see this nice bright red tail. And in basically every type of red-tailed hawk, you also see these dark patagial marks, which let's see if my little pen here will work. Yeah, that's these right there on the wing. Those little dark marks on the shoulders are called patagial marks, and most hawks don't have those, but red-tailed hawks do. So if you see a bird with a big red tail, well, you can know generally it's going to be a red-tailed hawk. But if you don't see the red tail, which certain types of red-tailed hawks don't actually have a red tail, there's a massive amount of subspecies of red-tailed hawks. And some, like the Kreiders and the Harlan's hawks, don't really show the red in the tail, but they still show these dark patagial marks. Harlan's hawk is dark almost overall, but Kreiders is a very light colored hawk, doesn't have much of a belly band, doesn't have much of a red tail. It looks almost white underneath, but they still have those dark patagial marks. But usually you see these either in pairs or most often just by themselves or sitting spaced out along a big open field. But let's listen to this bird and see if you recognize what this sound is. If you've ever watched a movie, this is the sound they use for a bald eagle. Bald eagles sound funny, so people don't like putting bald eagles in their movies, at least the sound. So when they have a bald eagle soaring overhead, they use a red-tailed hawk call. But this screech is very common for the red-tailed hawks to do, but it is not at all what a bald eagle sounds like. So if you're ever watching a movie, now you can be just as irritated as I am when you hear the bald eagle screeching like a red-tailed hawk. And watch any old Western, even if they don't show the bird on the screen, it's a very common background to a lot of movies. You hear the red-tailed hawk screeching, and if you're out here birding and you're just out in a big field, you can often hear the screech of a red-tailed hawk as he goes overhead. It's not repeated, it's not quick, like red-shouldered hawk. It does its screech repeated very quickly. Kiar, 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 kiar. Red-tailed hawk is just one long, drawn-out screech, and then some space in between it and the next one. All right, so black and turkey vultures. These are another common bird that you see soaring around all over Texas. They're common basically everywhere and in almost any number. You can see hundreds of black and turkey vultures roosting in the evening or just soaring and circling overhead. But telling them apart when they're soaring is actually not as difficult as you may seem. The one here on the left is the black vulture. Note the short, stubby tail, the wings that are kind of held squat in with its head pulled in, and the coloration of the black vulture is all of the wings and the body is pure black except for the wing tips. They just have those light outer wing tips. Then if you look on the right, you see the turkey vulture. It has light all along the wing tips and the back of the wings. So all the primaries, the secondaries, the tertials, they're all that light gray color. And that's fairly obvious when they're flying. It's not just those dark wing tips. But even if you can't see that detail, look at the length of the tail. The turkey vulture's tail is noticeably longer than that of the black vulture. Black vulture looks short and squatty, like it's got its shoulders hunched over, while the turkey vulture has that nice long tail. And if you see them head on or banking and soaring around, the black vulture flies with its wings almost level and flat, while the turkey vulture soars with its wings in a V shape, kind of upward in a V shape. Of course, the turkey vulture has a red head, and if you see them up close, that's fairly obvious. But when they're flying overhead, picking out the color of the head can be very difficult. But thankfully, there's a lot of other field marks. Either look at the wing tips or just look at the overall shape of the bird and the length of the tail. Now, I'll play the sounds, but there's not really much. They just hiss at each other. That's a black vulture. And that's a turkey vulture. I have never had to identify a vulture by sound. All right, so a little identification challenge, which again is just looking at some videos. Here's a nice downy woodpecker. Note the little short stubby beak. It's very delicate, almost like little tweezer beak that's a little bit heavier than tweezers. It can still drill away, but it's not a big, thick, heavy beak, but small, compact, looks like a stuffed animal woodpecker. And now the next one is our golden-fronted woodpecker. And here you can see a behavior that you don't usually expect with woodpeckers. He's on the ground, and he's drilling into the ground. And yes, these woodpeckers will do that. You don't usually see that very often with the ladderback woodpeckers or the downy woodpeckers. But golden-fronted woodpeckers, red-bellied woodpeckers, and another one that I missed putting in here that I just realized, the northern flicker, they all will occasionally jump down onto the ground and grab insects out of the soil. Now, I don't know how much more time am I allowed. It's 8 o'clock now. Is this about the length that you wanted for the video?
Yeah, this is about it.
Yep. Well, that's a perfect stopping point then, because this is the golden cheek warbler that I left off with last time. So if you don't mind me taking 30 seconds, I want to brag about our fun little Central Texas warbler here. This is the golden cheek warbler. If you weren't here last time, this is my favorite little warbler to get here in Central Texas. It's an endangered species and it only nests right here in the hill country. So I just want to play its song here. So if they're not around right now, but in the springtime when they come back, if you go off into the ash juniper woodlands with old growth ash juniper up on a hillside and listen for this. Nice little rising buzz, 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 buzz. You can find this gorgeous little golden-cheeked bird. It's black down the head, black down the throat. Got some nice little wing bars, and this beautiful little rising buzzy buzz, 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 buzz. Or its secondary lazy o daisy song. But that's the golden cheek warbler, and that is. Oh, he just wants to keep talking. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you for listening. And if there's any, well, the warbler just doesn't want to stop playing its song, but there we go. So if you have any questions at the end here, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, you can look up my website, huthavian.com. That's HUTHAVIAN.com. And I have a contact form there. You can send me an email through that, and I will be happy to answer any and all birding questions you may have.
It doesn't look like we just got a question. Let me read that for you.
Just got one.
It's not a question. They're just saying, thank you, Jesse.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm always happy to talk about birds. And once all the COVID stuff is over with, I'd be happy to lead a bird walk for you in person and show you some of these interesting birds in real life.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much, Jesse, for closing out our 2020 season. And it's going to be nice putting 2020 in our rearview mirror, I think.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. You'll have a new vice president coming January who can arrange speakers. You want to reach out to him with any speaker ideas. Nonetheless, thank you very much. And you guys have a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
Thanks for coming, everybody, and happy holidays.